There's an old saying in geopolitics: real power isn't who controls the door, it's who can afford to walk away from it. And right now, there's a brutal irony unfolding between Mexico and the United States that almost no one is explaining correctly. Because this story isn't really about visas or stamps or paperwork. It's about control. It's about dependency. And it's about what happens when one country slowly stops needing another one's permission to function. For years, Donald Trump turned visas into a weapon, not a neutral process, not a routine border control mechanism. A weapon. Every appointment felt like a trial. Every interview felt like an interrogation. Long waits, cold answers, sudden revocations, unexplained denials, and hovering over all of it was a clear psychological message. I decide if you enter. I decide if you stay. I decide when the door closes. And for a long time, that worked. Because when someone controls something you depend on, their threats don't even have to be spoken out loud. The power is implied. If this had happened a decade ago, Mexico would have been cornered. When you depend heavily on a single country, that country controls the tone. It raises tariffs. It threatens restrictions. It says, do this or I shut that. And Trump thrived on that dynamic, on being the gatekeeper, on domination through permission. So when Washington escalated again recently, it looked like more of the same. Reports surfaced that over 100,000 visas had been revoked since Trump's return. That's not noise, that's strategy. Student visas, skilled worker visas. People with no political role suddenly caught in a climate of pressure. And then came the most sensitive move of all, the quiet but deliberate cancellation of visas held by Mexican politicians and officials. Some cases became public because they couldn't be hidden anymore. High-profile figures confirming it themselves. And the message was unmistakable. I can open or close your access whenever I want. Normally, you'd expect retaliation, loud speeches, symbolic revenge, a matching crackdown. But Mexico didn't do that, because Mexico in 2026 isn't playing the small game anymore. Mexico is doing something far more dangerous to a country that relies on dominance. Mexico is reducing its need for the United States. And when someone stops needing you, your power shrinks quietly. No war, no shouting, no dramatic announcement. The board just changes. And one day, you realize your threats don't land the same way they used to. While Trump tightens visas, Mexico is experiencing one of the strongest tourism surges in its recent history. And tourism may sound soft, but when it scales, it becomes one of the hardest economic forces to block without paying a massive price. Tourism doesn't just generate money. It generates leverage. It creates freedom. For decades, the tourism relationship was comfortable and dangerous. Comfortable because U.S. tourists were next door. Dangerous because when you rely too heavily on one source, that source becomes a leash. The U.S. as the giant emitter, Mexico as the nearby destination, and in between a dynamic source of visitors. And that's precisely why this moment matters. Because while that dependency remains, other markets are growing faster. Mexico is pushing the door outward so it can't be slammed shut from the outside. One of the clearest signals came in Europe, where Mexico took a prominent role as a partner country at one of the most important tourism fairs for European and Spanish-speaking markets. To most people, that's just a photo op. To people who understand business, it's infrastructure. That's where flight routes are negotiated, packages are designed, operator agreements are signed, campaigns that last years are born. And Mexico went in with a clear objective: Stop being reduced to just Cancun in the world's imagination. Because when the world only associates you with 2 or 3 destinations, your brand is fragile. But when you expand the image, gastronomy, culture, experiences across all 32 states, routes that feel new, even if they've existed forever, you're no longer begging for attention. You're buying it with strategy. At the same time, the United States is moving in the opposite direction. More friction, more scrutiny, more in-person requirements, more bottlenecks, more of that heavy feeling that you're being examined rather than welcomed. And when friction rises, travel decisions change. Most people don't want to visit a country where they feel like a suspect by default. Here's where it turns dark for Washington. What policymakers call security, the world often experiences as hostility. And when a country projects hostility, it doesn't just deter migration. It deters tourists, conferences, students, shoppers, families, and business travelers. And the damage doesn't show up overnight. It shows up quietly. Fewer bookings, less enthusiasm, fewer recommendations. Meanwhile, other destinations capitalize. And Mexico is doing it without confrontation, because tourism is an experience market. And the experience begins long before arrival. It begins when people ask themselves, where will I be treated well? Where will I feel welcome now in the 2026 World Cup? This is where the irony becomes almost perfect. The tournament won't just be about soccer. It'll be about narrative, about visibility, about millions of first impressions. Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey will be global stages, millions of visitors, billions in spending, exposure that can't be bought through traditional advertising. And here's the part that quietly humiliates Trump's narrative. Millions of Americans will want to cross into the very country he spent years framing as a threat. They'll want to stay in Mexican hotels, eat Mexican food, fly Mexican routes, enjoy Mexican hospitality. And Mexico doesn't need to humiliate anyone to win. It just needs to welcome them because hospitality is power. Soft power, but real. Money flows toward places where people feel good. When a country turns tourism into stable prosperity, it builds something nearly impossible to sanction, a global web of interests. When Europeans, Asians, and Latin Americans develop their own Mexico, their favorite city, their favorite dish, their favorite experience, Mexico stops being America's neighbor and becomes the world's destination. That's why Mexico isn't just pushing more tourism. It's pushing better tourism. Cultural roots, gastronomy, eco-tourism, community experiences, places that never showed up on international radars before. That spreads money, creates jobs beyond the classic hubs, and when tourism becomes a network, it becomes stability, a cushion against political shocks. Then there's connectivity, the part almost no one understands as what it really is: freedom. A new air route isn't just another flight. It's a flow that doesn't depend on a politician's mood. It depends on demand and economics. When you multiply routes, you multiply options. And real power isn't controlling the door. It's having alternate paths. This is where the contrast with Trump becomes brutal. Trump feeds on symbols of dominance. I allow you in. I cancel you. But when Mexico becomes so attractive that even its critics vacation there, the story collapses. So the question answers itself. Who's winning this silent war? The answer isn't shouted. It's measured in routes, in bookings, in experiences, in which country opens and which country complicates. Because when a country becomes globally attractive, its position at the table changes. It stops being a pawn. It becomes an actor with weight, with too many interests surrounding it to be treated as subordinate. So this story isn't Trump revoked visas and Mexico got angry. That version lasts a day. The real story is deeper. Trump tried to dominate the relationship through permission, tried to make Mexico feel small, tried to weaponize access, and Mexico responded with strategy. Every time Trump tightens a door, Mexico opens 3 elsewhere. Every time visas become a threat, Mexico pushes its brand further into the world. Every time pressure rises, Mexico trains itself to need the U.S. less. That's the exact moment power flips. When someone stops needing your approval to succeed, the best response isn't revenge.